G'day everyone, let me show you how to create this cool design in Photoshop. My name is Hoy, and in this video we'll use masks, blend modes, gradients and more to create the design. If you want to follow along, you can use the exact images that I'm using. The links to all the images are in the description. So before we get started, I want to show you where I got my inspiration for the poster from, which is this design, this Alfred Hitchcock design, which I think is fantastic and stood the test of time. So much so that the 2017 movie starring Matt Damon, Suburbicon, has also copied the design. Okay, so let's get started with our own design. I'm just going to close that here, and I'm not going to save that. I'm going to go to File, Open, navigate to the folder where you've got your image saved, and let's click on the last one, which is Pexels Tuberones Photography, and press Open. Now I'm just going to zoom in a bit by pressing Command or Control 0, and the first thing that I'll do is rename the layer so we can keep track of this. So double click on that, and in the name field let's type background model and press return on our keyboard. We'll need to cut out the model from the background, and we'll use an automatic tool by going up to Select and go to Subject. Photoshop's going to have a think about it, and when it does, these marching ants will come out. When it does, let's create a mask by clicking on this mask icon here. The next thing that I want to do is to create a color grading on top of this. I don't want this picture as a colored picture. As you saw in the intro, it's kind of a monochromatic effect. So I'm going to create that effect by using a gradient map. So let's go to the adjustment layer icon here and select gradient map. Now don't confuse that with the gradient. We will use the gradient tool later, but for the time being, let's select gradient map. And at the moment, my picture has got darker because it's using the color of my foreground and background and applying it to the dark and light areas. So depending on the color that you have on your color palette here, you might see different things to what I'm seeing. Nevertheless, we can always change that. In fact, we will change it. So let's go to our properties panel here and click on this gradient bar. If you don't see your properties panel, you can simply go to Window and just make sure that Properties is selected. So let's click on this to bring up our gradient editor tool. Now before we use this, let's quickly explain what a gradient map does. So here you can see the bars here containing dark colors here, which means that any color here will be mapped or assigned to the dark areas. So at the moment, black is selected, so wherever the dark shades are, it will apply black. Here the opposite is true. Where you have the highlights or the white areas, it will apply whatever color this is, and in my case it's white, so it's creating white or applying white in those areas, and then in between it applies, the different shades as shown here. So we're going to change that by clicking on the color stop here and then clicking on this color here, and I've already got a color in mind. So if you want to follow along, you can type in 171515, and that's sort of a off black, and I'm happy with that, so I'm going to press OK. And then for the bright areas, I don't want white, so I'm going to click on the color stop and then press on this color bar here, and again I've got a color in mind which is like a light yellow. The hex code is F0E3A6, and that looks great. I'm going to press OK. Now I want a little bit more yellow than the dark area, so what I can do is click on this little diamond dot here and then drag it to the left so the location is around about 40. So here, alternatively, you can click it and then just type in the value 40. Now I noticed that this diamond here is very small, so you might have accidentally created a new color stop. So I'm going to simulate that and just show you what I mean. You might have created another color stop here and then adjusted your color here. So if you've done that, no problem. Don't panic. All you can do is click and drag this color stop off so that disappears, and then when I let go of the mouse, my color reverts back to what I had it. Now, to see that diamond again, you can press either one of these color stops and then that will come back. I'm going to click on this and that says 40, so I'm fine with that. So I'm going to press OK. Now the next thing that we'll do is I want to scale up this image, but before I do that, I want to protect the original image size. I'm going to create a smart object. Now what a smart object is, it's a wrapper that protects your original image and as well as allows you to go back to any effects and change any of the settings that you've applied. To create a smart object, let's make sure that our gradient map layer is selected and then press Shift and then click on the background model layer. So both layers are selected. Right click on this and then go to convert to smart object. Now you'll know that it's a smart object by this icon here. Before I resize it, I'm going to rename this layer by double clicking on it and then just repeat it by typing background model, return on our keyboard. I'm going to zoom out a bit because I need some space to resize this. So what I'm going to do is press Option or Alt if you're on a PC and then scroll wheel mouse down. Something like this is fine. It'll give me enough space to magnify this picture. So I'm going to bring up my transform control handles by pressing Command or Control T on the keyboard, and I'm going to resize it by pressing Shift and Option, that's Shift and Alt if you're on a PC, and then clicking and dragging it from the top right corner, something like this. And what Alt does is just basically scale it from this anchor point here. Now obviously I need to move this so I can see it. So something like this. Now this is probably a little bit too big now, so I'm going to press Shift and Option and move that back up. Now if you're following along, I'm resizing it to around about 204%, 205%. So if you want to be close to what I'm doing, that's as much as I'm resizing up to. Now I'm cutting off this logo design here. For what reason? There's no reason. I'm just using that as a mark to scale it or move it down to something like this so I don't see the t-shirt design. Once I've got it in position like this, I'm going to accept it by pressing Return on my keyboard. That's Enter if you're on a PC. And then I'm going to fit it to screen again by pressing Command or Control 0. The next thing that we'll do is put a background at the back of the model. To do that, we're going to use a gradient, not the gradient map, the gradient. So let's go to our adjustment layer icon here and go all the way up to gradient. And I'm going to select the style as radial. I'm going to select this gradient bar here and we'll see our friend again, the gradient editor menu again. So I'm going to use the same colors but in reverse now. So I'm going to click on this color stop here and then click on this color again. And the point I want here is this yellow, which is F0E3A6. I'm going to press OK and then click on this color stop here. Now it's going to have a problem, but I'm going to proceed anyway because you might face the same problem. So I'm just going to show you what the error is and then show you how to fix that. So with this color stop selected, I'm going to click on this color bar here and then type in that color for the off black, which is 171515, and then press OK. Now you notice that this bar hasn't changed at all. That's because the option that I have at the moment is foreground color going to transparency. So we don't want to do all that work again. What we can do is click on this stop here and that controls the opacity. Let's click on that. And at the moment the opacity is 0. So if I scrub this, click and scrub to the right and make it 100% opaque, you'll see the black here now. We're almost done, but not quite. So what I want to do is adjust this middle point here. So what I've done was click on this point here and I want more of the yellow than the black. So I'm going to move this location to around about 70 here. I'm going to press OK and then press OK here. I'm just going to move it down here by clicking and dragging it below the background model. The only problem is that the vignetting effect that I'm going for is a bit too harsh. Now, I deliberately did that. You say, yeah, sure. But I just wanted to show you how to soften that edge. There are many ways to soften the edge, but I'm going to do it an easy way. So with the gradient icon selected, not this mask here, I'm going to double click on this and I'm just going to scale up the gradient fill. So if I do that, you can see that the radius of the gradient gets larger and larger. And so what I'm doing now is just scaling it to the point where I think I have enough of the vignetting. So maybe 145% is fine. You can see that I've just got a hint of it. Now, if I want more of a hint, I can just reduce that ever so slightly. So maybe even 135 maybe instead of 145. All the other options you can leave as it is and press OK. Now, the next thing that we'll do is that this image is a little bit too clean. What I want to do is create like a newspaper effect on top of it. You know, the dot bitmap look that I'm going for. So to do that, I'm going to add a filter. So I'm going to click on this background model layer here, not because I'm going to do anything with it, but because I want to add a new layer on top of this. So let's go to our new layer icon here, and it's going to give me a transparent layer here. Now, with the filter that we're going to use, it has to have something on the layer. It can't work with transparency. So no problem at all. We're going to fill that with 50% gray. So on your keyboard, press Shift Delete. That's Shift Backspace if you're on a PC, and that will bring up our fill dialog. Now, I've already got 50% gray selected, but if you don't, just make sure that you've got 50% gray. You can leave all this as it is and then press OK. I'm going to rename this layer to texture and then press return on our keyboard. Let's make this a smart object. So let's right click, scroll down to convert to smart object. Now, once you have that, let's go to filter and go to filter gallery. Now you can see that I have been playing around with it, so I'm just going to delete these so you can see what to do when starting from scratch. From the options here, let's click on sketch, and that will bring up all these options. Let's click on halftone pattern here, and my settings for the halftone pattern is a size of 2. Basically, the size is just how big these dots are. I don't want it that big, so I'm going to reset it to 2. And the contrast is just the contrast of the pattern. So we'll leave it at 0, and the pattern is dots. I'm going to create another filter on top of this. So to do that, let's click on this plus icon here. And then still on your sketch option here, let's click on tone edges here. And these default values are fine, except for the contrast is too bright. So I'm going to dial it all the way down to 1. Once we've got that, I'm going to press OK. Now you see that the problem here is that we can't see through it. So to fix that, let's change the blend mode from normal to vivid light. Now if I zoom in here, you can see the texture that it's put on the model, but it's also put it on the background, which I don't want. I'm going to clip it to the background model here. I'm going to hover my mouse between this layer and the texture layer here, and then press Option or Alt on my keyboard. My cursor will change into this down arrow with a box, and once it does, I'm going to click once there, and that will just apply that effect onto the model. Let's see what the texture is before and after. Before and after. I'm going to fit this image to screen by pressing Command or Control 0. The next thing that we need to do is to create these boxes around it, so we can apply the images and then the colored overlay on top of this. So let's select our shape tool here or you can press U on the keyboard. Now make sure that your fill is set to none, which is this red line across it. And then let's make sure that our size of our stroke is 15. And then the color of our stroke is that yellowish color. Now to set that color, click on this icon here, and then you can type in this color here. It's F0E3A6. And when you've got that, press OK. And now the task is simply draw out some rectangles, however big you want it. Now you saw on the intro that I had 3 columns of boxes here. And what I'm going to do is have 4 rows of boxes here, and then 3 rows of boxes here, and then 4 rows of boxes here. So the first box is simple, so you just draw out a box however big you like it. Now for the second box, I'm just going to use my move tool to deselect out of this, or select out of this, and then I'm going to replicate this here. So with my rectangle layer here selected, I'm going to press Option or Alt on my keyboard. That will change the cursor into these double arrows here. Once you see these double arrows with Option or Alt still selected on my keyboard, let's click and drag on the mouse and press Shift as you do it. The Shift will align it directly vertical, and then just drag a rectangle down. Now, I don't want the rectangle to be all uniform size, all the same size, so I'm going to select this rectangle 1 copy. I'm just going to double click on that and rename it to 2 so we don't forget which one is which. I'm going to bring up my transform control handles by pressing Command or Control T, and then I'm going to just resize that as what I would like it. So something like this. Now I'm going to zoom in by pressing Option or Alt if you're on a PC and scroll wheel mouse up, and then I'm going to press this check mark here to confirm the changes. Now you see that the boxes haven't lined up exactly, so I'm going to click and drag it so it snaps into place. Once it does, it looks like it's sort of one big rectangle here. Now the reason why my rectangle snapped into place is because I have that option selected. If you're not snapping into place, what you can do is go to View and just make sure that number 1, you've got extras ticked here, and then Show Smart Guides. And what the Smart Guides are those pink outlines here. But you also need to make it snap to. So just make sure that snap is checked, and then snap to layers is selected. But while you're here, you may as well just select all these options here. Snap to the guide, snap to layers, and snap to document bounds. And that will just make it a little bit easier for you to make sure that these are all aligned. I'm going to repeat this process by making sure that rectangle 2 is selected and duplicating it by pressing Option or Alt on the keyboard, and then dragging another one out, pressing Shift on my keyboard again, and then moving it like that. Remember, to bring out the transform controls, let's press Command or Control T and then zoom in a bit just to line that up. Now, something like this. I'm panning across by pressing spacebar on my keyboard and then just clicking on my mouse and dragging it around. And then I'm going to do something like this. Press return on the keyboard to accept that change. And I'm just going to make sure that this is aligned with the top rectangle. And I know that it is because of this horizontal pink line here. I'm going to double click on this and rename that to 3 so we can keep track of it. I'm just going to do one more with you and then leave it to you to do all your rectangles. And the reason why I'm going to do one more is because I want to show you how to deal with these edges here. So with the rectangle 3 layer selected, let's duplicate it again. Now again, it's Option and then click and then holding Shift just to move it down 100% vertically. Just going to move that down here. Now I'm going to rename this by double clicking on it and typing rectangle 4. let's bring out our transformation controls, Command or Control T, and then what I want to do is make sure that I resize this bottom edge not to the bottom of this document here. I want to move it all the way down so I don't see this horizontal bar here. And the reason is because if I leave it up here, when I do my effect, you're going to see this bar here, which I don't want. So I'm just going to move it down to beyond the canvas boundary. I'm going to accept that by pressing return on the keyboard. Now, for the sake of speeding up this tutorial, I'm not going to create the other rectangles while you watch me. I've already made one before, so I'm going to speed up the video and then see you back here when I have all the rectangles in place. Okay, so this is my rectangles. Because we've got so many rectangles here, I want to make it neater. So I'm going to make myself some more space by just reducing the size of the properties panel here. So the next thing that we need to do is just to make all these as a smart object. It will not only make it a little bit tidier, but it also allows us to clip this against the model layer. Just go up to your top rectangle layer here, which I've named it rectangle 11. Let's scroll all the way down and press shift and then click on this bottom rectangle layer here, right click and then scroll down to convert to smart object. Let's clip it to this layer here by pressing option on the keyboard and hover your mouse between this layer and the texture layer and click once on the mouse. Now you see what the effect that has is clip it to this model here. Now let's rename this to rectangles. Now the next thing that we'll do is make the color overlay on top of this. So you saw in the intro that we had bits of red selectively in these areas here. Now before we make the overlay, what I need to do is make the background model into black and white, because if I put red on top of yellow, it's not going to give me a red color. It's going to give me a slightly different color. So with the rectangles layer selected, I'm going to go to my adjustment layer icon here and go up to the black and white adjustment layer. Now let's clip the black and white adjustment layer because I only want it to affect the model. So click on that and you'll see that it also affected the lines that we created. So I'm going to click and drag this to below the rectangle, so to restore the color of these lines here. Now, because we don't want the black and white in every area of the model, I'm going to invert this mask. So with the mask layer selected here, you know that it's selected by these angles around this mask here. Let's press Command or Control I on the keyboard, and that will hide the black and white effect. On a mask, black hides effects and white reveals it. So the parts that we want to reveal is here and other places. So I'm going to get my marquee tool here by clicking here, or you can press M on your keyboard, and I'm just going to draw out a rectangle to where I want the black and white effect. So something like this, click and drag, and then release my mouse when I'm done. I've got white as my background. Now, if you don't have white, you can press D on your keyboard to reset the colors to default, and that will switch white to your foreground. And with white as your foreground, let's press Option or Alt and press Delete on your keyboard, and that's backspace if you're on a PC. And what that has done is you can see it a tiny little bit is changed wherever I select it into black and white here. Now let's keep doing that for the areas that we want black and white. Now the next thing that we'll do is put the color overlay on top of this. Now before we do that, I've got this selected, so let's deselect it by pressing Command or Control D, and with this black and white layer selected, I'm going to go to my adjustment layer icon and go up to solid color, and the color that we'll use is C13F3F, and then I'm going to press OK. Now that doesn't look great at the moment. It's applying everywhere on the model. We don't want that. We only want the red to apply in the areas that we've cut out. Now we can create another mask, but I don't want to do that. What we can do is just replicate the mask that we've done on our black and white layer and apply it to this. Now to do that, let's click on the mask here. Let's press Option or Alt on a keyboard and click and drag it on top of this color fill layer here, and then it's going to ask us whether we want to replace the layer mask. Let's press yes, and that will apply it to only the areas that we want it. Now it still doesn't look great, and that's because the blending mode isn't great. So let's click on this layer and let's click on the blend mode and select soft light. So the next thing that we need to do is apply the images on top of this background image. So let's go to File and go to Place Embedded. Navigate to the folder where you've got your image saved. And the first one that we'll use is this broken glass texture here. And press Place. I'm going to just accept that for the time being by pressing this check mark here. Just going to revert back to my Move tool by pressing V on the keyboard. And I'm just going to move this layer up here, and that has broken our clipping mask for the rectangle. So let's click on this rectangles layer here and let's clip it back again. So Option and just click here, and just to tidy things up, I'm just going to group all this into one group here. So clicking on the rectangles layer here, I'm going to press Shift and then clicking on the background model layer and press Command or Control G. And let's double click on this and type model. So now let's return back to our broken glass layer here by clicking on the layer. I'm going to resize that by pressing Command or Control T to bring out the transform control handles. And I'm just going to resize it. But because I can't see through this, I'm just going to reduce the opacity of this to something like 70, 71 even. And then just moving up to where I want it. So where I want it is basically here, and I'm just going to move it here, just going to rotate it. It's just stylistic points, but what I want to do is retain some of these cracks so it's within the model's body. So something like this, just going to resize it a little bit bigger. So once I'm happy with it, I'm just going to press this check mark here. Just going to bump up the opacity back up to 100 here, and then just change the blend mode to one of these lightened ones. So lightened seems to be good, and you can't really tell, but I'm just going to zoom in a bit. But it's still got this sort of grayish bits here, which I don't want. So I'm going to bring up my levels adjustment. I'm going to press Command L on the keyboard. That will bring up this dialog box here, and I'm just going to increase the contrast of this. So I'm just going to play around with this. So just looking at this image here, and while I scrub across here. So if I exaggerate it, you can see what it's doing. It's also affecting this bit here. So something like 46 looks fine to me, and then maybe bring up the highlights as well, making the whites whiter. So if I exaggerate that, you can see that here. So something like 195, and maybe the midtones, I'm going to dial that down maybe to around about 0.63, and I'm going to press OK. Just going to drag it down a bit. As I say, I want this within the model's body here, so I'm okay with that. But what I'm not okay with this is that these are spilling outside of his body. So I'm just going to mask that out. So with this layer selected, I'm going to create a layer mask here by pressing this icon here, and get my brush tool by pressing this icon here, or you can press B on your keyboard, and I'm going to switch my foreground color from white to black. I can click on this toggle switch here, or X on my keyboard. Just going to make sure that my brush hardness is 100%. So a quick way to do that is press this and just make sure that the hardness is 100%. Going to click out of it, and then just going to resize my brush a little bit by pressing Control, Option, left click, and then just drag it all the way to the left, well, not all the way, but to the left. If you're on a PC, is Alt, right click, and then scrub it to the left. Just going to rub that out. Just erase all the bits that I don't want. So something like this looks good. And I'm going to fit it to screen, Command or Control 0. I'm going to create a group for this so we stay organized. So with this layer selected, let's press Command or Control G, double click on that and type in broken glass. I'm going to collapse this and just to hide it so we have a little bit more space. And I'm going to include or bring in the next picture. So let's go to File, Place Embedded, and we're going to use this Pixels Twine Kit Junior picture. Let's double click on this. I'm going to confirm that by pressing this check mark and just going to reduce the opacity by something like 50 something. And I'm going to bring up my transform controls by pressing Command or Control T and just going to reduce that by pressing Shift and Option. So something like this, and move it somewhere like this. Now I'm deliberately pushing her elbow outside the lines here. So also I'm going to make her hair also dip outside this rectangle here, just to give it a little bit of effect so she's not constrained within the box here. So I'm going to accept that by pressing this check mark here. Just bump up the opacity back to 100, and what we need to do is mask her out now. So let's go to select and subject. Photoshop's again is going to have a think about it. Once it does, let's click on this mask layer icon here, and it's done a terrific job. Now what I want to do is mask out the body here. So although I want her hair to dip below the rectangle, I want to cut her off. That sounds awful, doesn't it? But I want to just mask this area here, so her body is sort of contained within this box here. So I've already got a mask here, but I don't want to mess around with this mask. So what I'm going to do is create a group within itself. So with this layer selected, let's press Command or Control G, and that will create this group. While we're here, let's rename this to Model, press Return, and I'm going to create a layer mask on this group here, so I'm not disturbing the fantastic mask that Photoshop has done on the model herself. So let's click on that, and then I'm going to zoom in a bit. I'm going to use this marquee tool here, or you can press M on your keyboard, and I'm going to create this shape here so it covers her dress here. Now I'm going to zoom in again by pressing Option and scroll wheel mouse up, just to make sure that I've got it exactly in line. Now I don't have it exactly in line here, so I'm just going to click and drag so my selection is just touching the border here. But the problem is that we don't have the rest of her body selected here. So that's not a problem. Let's select our lasso tool here, or you can press L on your keyboard and you can add to your current selection. If you hold Shift on your keyboard, your cursor will turn into this plus icon here. And with this plus icon, I'm going just to draw out the selection that I want to make here. And that has combined it with my rectangle selection here. So with my mask layer selected and black as my foreground, I'm going to press Option or Alt on my keyboard and press Delete. I'm going to deselect that by pressing Command or Control D. Let's fit it to screen, Command or Control 0. Now I want this to be in black and white. So I'm going to click on the model layer here and go to my adjustment layer icon and go up to black and white. Now you'll see that this has affected the whole image, which I don't want. So I'm going to clip this black and white adjustment layer to this model layer here by pressing Option and then hover between the layers and then just click once here. Now it's still too bright, so what I want to do is adjust some of these effects here. So I'm going to give me some more space on the properties panel. So with my black and white layer selected, I'm just going to play around with these sliders here. So I'm just going to reduce the red to something like 5, maybe this to minus 33, and then all the way down to minus 200 for the blues, and then same for this. Now, I don't think the greens will do anything because it's got minimal greens in the image, so it doesn't really matter what I selected. Same goes with the cyans. Now, the problem is that it's still a little bit too bright. So what I want is the newspaper effect, the dullness of a newspaper. So what I'm going to do is reduce the contrast of it. So I'm going to use levels to do that. So with my model layer selected, let's press Command L on the keyboard. And what I'm going to adjust is the dark point. So I want the dark point not so dark, so maybe down to 21, and then the light point's not as light, so maybe down to 100 and maybe 181. And then I'm just going to adjust the midtones. So maybe something like 0.67, and that gives me this not as contrasty picture here, which is what I'm looking for. So it's kind of like a newspaper dullness. I'm going to accept that by pressing OK. So let's stay organized by collapsing this layer here, and we're going to bring in the next image, which is the van. So let's go up to File and go to Place Embedded and go to this one here, Matthias Silva, and press Place. Now I'm going to accept that by pressing this check mark here. I'm going to reduce the opacity so I can see it a little bit better against the background layer here. Let's resize it. I want to put this van in this little corner here. So with your van layer selected, let's press Command or Control T, and then just press Shift and Option and just resize that to something like this, just small enough so you can fit it within that little space there. I don't know why I should have done the this rectangle a little bit bigger, but hey, this looks great in any case. So once I've got this size within the cap, I'm going to press OK and then bump up the opacity back to 100%. Now let's make a selection out of this so we can create a mask. So with the layer selected, let's click on Select and select Subject. Once it's selected it, let's click on the mask layer icon, and that has removed the background from that layer. Again, as with this picture here, what I want to do is create a black and white layer here. So let's go down to our adjustment layer icon here. Let's select black and white, and again it's created the whole image to black and white. So let's clip this black and white layer to the van layer, Option on the keyboard and click on that. I'm going to select the top layer and press Shift on my keyboard and select the bottom layer, so then I can group it. So now let's create a group by pressing Command Control G, and let's double click on that and rename it to van. Now this black and white van, I actually don't want it to be black and white. You can leave it as black and white if you want, but I actually want it to be in the red shade. So I'm just going to move this back up a bit. So instead of redoing the red, I'm just going to steal the red from the model layer. So with this layer selected, I'm going to press Option or Alt on my keyboard, click and drag it all the way up to here. You'll see that it has applied the red again in these areas where it showed white. So I don't want that. So what I'm going to do is click on this mask and then just drag it to the trash can. I don't want that, and confirm that, delete. So I'm deleting the mask. Now again, it's applying it to the whole image. So let's clip that again, Option on the keyboard, and then just click on that. Now the next thing that we'll do is bring in the last image here. So I'm just going to collapse this van folder here as well as the model so it's all nice and tidy. Let's go up to File and go to Place Embedded. Let's bring in our buildings, double click on that. For those of you who don't know, this is a picture of the Sydney CBD. In the center, we have the Sydney Tower. Sydney is where I'm from, Sydney, Australia, that is. So it has a special place in my heart. Not that you needed to know, but I wanted to share that. So I'm going to click on this check mark here just to accept the placement. Again, let's reduce the opacity of that down to something like 70. I'm going to select my move tool so I can move it. At the moment, I've got my lasso tool. So I'm going to press V on the keyboard to bring up my move tool. And I'm just going to move it down here. I'm going to pan down spacebar and click and drag just to move this up. And I'm going to resize it a little bit smaller because it's still a little bit too big. So remember to restrain it in proportion. Press Shift on your keyboard. And I'm going to press this check mark. Now again, we want it to be in black and white. So let's create a black and white adjustment layer by going to this icon here, go up to black and white, and then clip it to this building layer here. Let's create a group while we're here. Let's select this top layer, Shift on the keyboard and press on the bottom layer, Command or Control G to make a group, and double click on that, and let's rename that to something like Skyline, return on our keyboard. So what I want is to make the sky disappear, but the sky is blue, and at the moment we have the black and white filter. So I'm going to use not a well-known trick. So what most people do with black and white adjustment layers is basically just use the black and white adjustment layer and just keep the default. So what I'm going to do is use a preset called High Contrast Blue Filter. And what that does is tries to reduce the amount of blues in the image. Now this still doesn't quite do it. So what I'm going to do is use a blend mode on the image itself. I'm going to click on the building image here. I'm going to select this and go to a blend mode called Divide. And that has created this really cool effect here. The only issue is that the rest of the image is bleeding onto his shirt here. So what I'm going to do is create a mask on this skyline group here. So with this skyline group selected, let's press M on the keyboard to bring up our marquee tool. I'm going to zoom in a bit by pressing Option on the keyboard and scroll wheel mouse up. And then I'm just going to make a selection so it covers the area that we want. I'm going to zoom in even more to make sure that my selection is bang on, which it isn't. Now what I can do to transform my selection is go to Select and go to Transform Selection. Now I'm going to zoom out a little bit so I can see the transform controls, and then just adjust that out a little bit so it covers the edges, and I'm going to press this check mark here. Now the next thing that we need to do is to create a mask. So let's click on the mask layer icon here, and that has masked out everything else. Let's fit it to screen by pressing Command or Control 0. And that's how you create this cool design which was inspired by the Alfred Hitchcock's poster. Let's review what we've learned so far. I'm going to just resize my panel here and start from the beginning by just disabling everything else. First, we had this model here. We cut it out and applied a gradient on top of it by using the gradient map here. So it has this cool looking effect on it. After that, we applied a texture on top of it, so which is this texture here. We also wanted to make sure that we had a background behind the model, so we used the gradient fill tool here, and then we added the rectangles and clipped it to the model, and then we created the color overlays. To make the color overlay, we made sure that the areas that we wanted the color were in black and white first. Otherwise, the color overlay will be a weird color. So if I turn on the red, that's with the black and white. If we didn't create the black and white layer, you see that the yellowish color shines through. And the next thing that we did was add the pictures on top of this model. So we first started off with this broken glass layer here, and then we added the model, we added the van, and then finally we added the picture of the skyline here. I hope you found this useful. Thanks so much for watching. If you want to continue to level up your Photoshop skills, make sure you check out my other videos where I have explainer videos to make you go from beginner to pro in no time.